Gracias. Thank you, Beatriz. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this important event. It's so important to try and understand what's going on in Haiti, understand the root causes, and hopefully try and find some answers to the way forward. 7 to 10 minutes obviously is not a very long period of time to try and analyze the root causes of what is a deep, deep problem. And what I'm going to do is really just give my own personal impressions, what I witnessed firsthand in the years that I've been traveling as a reporter to Haiti, starting in 1987. Beatrice mentioned 1987 as being a very important event in Haitian history, and yes, of course, the new constitution that was written in 1987 was indeed an optimistic moment for Haiti, only months after having ousted the dictatorship of the Duvalier family. But that optimism didn't last very long at all. The elections of 1987 in November were an utter disaster. One of the most horrific days that that Haiti has experienced, certainly in electoral terms, when voters were gunned down at polling stations, and the election had to be cancelled only hours after polling stations opened. And I think it's important today, looking back at moments like that, to reflect upon how, while Haiti may seem like it's at a very bleak moment in its history today, with the level of misrule, the president being assassinated, the gangs controlling large neighborhoods of the country, that Haiti has actually experienced tremendous political turmoil in its recent past, and has actually emerged from those moments. So while this may seem like a terrible moment in Haiti, we shouldn't perhaps give up hope. And it's not as though this is new. While it may seem unprecedented, what's going on in Haiti today, unfortunately, there is plenty of precedent for it. There were elections eventually. After those disastrous elections in 87, there were elections in 1988. And the military did actually allow democratic rule to be reestablished. And I remember vividly being a reporter in Haiti during the elections in 1990, and the incredible high level of participation and enthusiasm there were for those elections, and the astonishing result with President Aristide being elected. Of course, it was only a few months later, in 1991, I think he'd only been president for 7 months, when, as Beatrice mentioned, President Aristide was ousted in a military coup. And I remember flying into Haiti in the, I guess, the day after the coup. All of the airlines had canceled their flights. So the only way that we could get in was by chartering a private jet from Miami Airport, a few of us journalists, and we flew into Port-au-Prince Airport. And I remember the scene. The airport was completely abandoned. It had been shot up. We didn't go through passport control. We just walked, we got off the plane and walked out onto the streets, and there were dead bodies lying in the streets right outside the airport and all the way into the city center. Again, an appalling scene. so soon after a really splendid democratic election. Within, unfortunately, well, we again thinking back on Haiti's recent past, the next 3 years after President Aristide's ouster in the coup, until 1994, Haiti went through one of the ugliest periods in its recent history under the de facto military rule. Appalling human rights atrocities committed by the military and their paramilitary allies. I won't even begin to describe some of the, one of the most notorious human rights atrocities was the way in which the military used rape as a tactic to intimidate the opposition, singling out women to terrify families and to maintain the military in power. President Aristide was restored to power in 1994. Again, I remember being in the presidential palace, which no longer stands, and seeing President Aristide land on a helicopter on the lawn, and the tremendous reception that he received from the population outside the gates. Renewed optimism, which lasted a few years. President Aristide was not happy that he had to abide by the term of his presidency. He wasn't allowed to recover the years that he lost. But he was succeeded by President Préval, and Haiti seemed to be getting back on track. And then President Aristide came back, and unfortunately we entered back into another period of instability, gang rule. Let's not forget that what's happening in Haiti today is not the first time that Haiti has been overrun with gangs. It wasn't as widespread in the period of President Aristide's second presidency. It was restricted mostly to Cité Soleil and Les Salines, the Chimère, as they were called. But they were being run politically. There were political ties between the presidential palace and the gangs in Cité Soleil. And that, if you like, was a precedent for what we're seeing today. There are obviously very serious allegations that the gangs in Haiti today are being politically manipulated. But again, I want to make the point that this isn't the first time that Haiti has experienced that kind of political manipulation through gangs. Unfortunately, the gangs today are much more widespread, and it's not just in Port-au-Prince or just in neighborhoods like Cité Soleil and Les Salines. It's all over the city, and it's not just in Port-au-Prince, it's in other cities too. The political turmoil obviously resulted in the early 2000s, resulted in President Aristide's removal from power. Again, I remember traveling to Gonaïves to interview a group that was in opposition to President Aristide, and they called themselves the Cannibal Army. Gonaïves, the police station in Gonaïves, the police had been removed by President Aristide's parallel police force, the attachés, and they were committing terrible human rights abuses in the police station, torturing local political leaders. Again, it was incredibly shocking to see that going on at the time. And it's, again, a reminder that what's happening today, it's not the first time. And there was unfortunately, Haiti was the president was overthrown again by the cannibal army and the remnants of the Haitian army, and the international community had to return to restore order. And again, then we had a little bit more optimism. And I remember in 2009, the political leadership came to Miami. And there was a conference here in Miami where the Haitian business community and political leadership declared that Haiti was open for business. And there was tremendous optimism about the future of Haiti. There was political stability and there was business optimism. And unfortunately, that all came to a shuddering halt barely a month later with the 2010 earthquake. So Haiti has not only suffered political instability and misrule, it's also suffered tremendous misfortune because of natural disasters. In some ways, if one's looking at the root causes of what's the situation today in Haiti, it's a kind of a perfect storm. Political instability with natural disasters poured on top. And then if you want to add one other ingredient, it's perhaps the failure of the international community to help Haiti in ways that really might help Haiti. And the international community really needs to look at itself today and ask itself, what did it do wrong? What might it have done, and what can it still do to help Haiti? And I'll leave perhaps that question for some of the other panelists to examine. The big issue is, can security be restored? I don't think really there's much chance of anything improving in Haiti until security is restored. But can that be done without an international intervention? Does the United Nations have the credibility to help restore order? Does it even have the will? One doesn't see much sign of it right now from the United Nations. The United States unilaterally, that looks pretty unlikely. The OAS really doesn't have much experience in this sort of thing. And after the recent involvement of Latin American nations in the UN stabilization mission in Haiti, that doesn't look too good either. Even though the Brazilians are much loved in Haiti, the role played by the Colombian former soldiers in the assassination of President Moïse obviously makes Haitians look very skeptically at Latin American militaries. So in conclusion, what can be done to help Haiti and understand the root causes? Haiti's problem in many ways is that it doesn't have, and I don't mean this too unkindly, it doesn't have a great deal to offer the world in strategic terms or in geopolitical terms. It doesn't have oil, it doesn't have gold, it doesn't have cobalt, it doesn't have lithium. It used to have baseballs. It has a tremendous workforce. Many people don't know that Major League Baseball used to get all its baseballs from the Rawlings factory in Haiti. But Haiti doesn't produce much of anything anymore. It produces one of the world's most precious essential oils, vetiver, down in the south of Haiti, in Les Cayes, the area that was affected by the earthquake. One of Haiti's best kept secrets, vetiver, an essential oil in many of the most expensive perfumes, is 50% of the world's produce is produced in the south of Haiti. But really, the wealth in Haiti is all controlled by local elites protecting their franchises, whether that's the Coca-Cola bottling factory or Heineken, or the hotel chains, Marriott, Best Western, the Digicel cell phone company. There's very little international investment in Haiti, so there aren't international voices calling for action to help Haiti. And while the migration issue is limited to the U.S. Southern border, with obviously very significant numbers of Haitians coming up from Chile in particular and Brazil, I don't hear voices in the United States saying that something must be done to address even the migration issue, perhaps until Haitians start getting into boats again, like they did in the past. The US may perhaps sit up and take notice. So Haiti, unfortunately today, is a failed state. It's been a failed state for some time. It's actually pushed past beyond being a failed state. It is now in a state of collapse. It's in survival mode. It's perhaps comparable only to Somalia. And like I say, it's been made worse by the natural disasters. So I know it's a very bleak picture, but it's not the first and only time that Haiti has been in the situation that it's in today. And perhaps by looking at some of the ways in which we addressed the political crises in the past, we can find some solutions for the future. Thank you very much.